Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following.
A state of emergency has been declared in BC as thousands of firefighters continue to battle around 300 wildfires across the province. Newborns in Alberta will now be screened for spinal muscular atrophy thanks to a new funding initiative. And we now know the date when the U.S. border will be opening up to Canadians, but it won't be the same date as when Americans will be allowed to cross over to Canada by land.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. A state of emergency has been declared in BC as the province's wildfires continue to grow. Wildfire threats in many regions are forcing thousands of people to prepare for mass evacuations. More than 3,000 firefighters are now battling blazes in the Okanagan, Kamloops, and Caribou regions. Around 100 firefighters are set to arrive in BC from Mexico. Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth says officials are also in talks with Australia for more help. Help has also arrived from Alberta, Quebec, and New Brunswick. Around 300 fires were still burning across the province, with several being out of control. Meanwhile, firefighters in Oregon have their hands full. The Boot Lake fire in Oregon has become so intense that it's creating its own weather. The fire has scorched over 600 square miles in an area larger than Los Angeles. It grew to around 340,000 acres and is only around 30% contained. It is one of at least 8 large fires burning in Oregon and one of at least 83 burning across 13 states. The Oregon Department of Forestry said drought conditions are driving the fire potential, with 90% of the state experiencing severe drought conditions. In Northern California, meanwhile, authorities have expanded evacuations on a wildfire in Alpine County. The wildfire, which was started by lightning and fanned by high winds, has now burned more than 60 square miles.
I looked back out, and the fire was too close. I knew my house was going to go, so I told my daughter to grab everything they could. My wife and 2 boys are on vacation in Oregon, and my daughter and I, we grabbed as much as we could and got out. Didn't have much time, but we got out alive, so that's what matters. I mean, don't get me wrong, it hurts. Nothing I can do about it. Lost my whole life, everything I've ever had, owned. The kids are what's going to matter. I got 3 teenagers. They're going to come home to a moonscape, you know. I'm worried about them.
The U.S. Department of Homeland Security is extending its COVID-19 restrictions on travel by land from Canada until at least August the 21st. Public Safety Minister Bill Blair said this shouldn't come as a surprise, being that the U.S. would not be following Canada's lead. Fully vaccinated Americans will be allowed to cross our border by land on August the 9th. The decision by the U.S. is being met with some anger here in Canada, as a renewed cross-border partnership issued by the Biden administration and the Trudeau government in February promised a science-based coordinated approach to reopening the border. There's a pretty exciting announcement for seniors living in our city. A new affordable housing development has started on the south side. The new homes will give seniors who are living with a mixed income a place to call home. As Carson Marsouk explains now, the development was a much-needed investment here in Lethbridge.
Shovels are in the ground and dirt has been moved to make way for 64 new homes for seniors with a mixed income living in Lethbridge. Alberta Seniors and Housing Minister Josephine Pon was in Lethbridge on Wednesday to help break the ground.
Home for Albertan is important. As affordable housing minister, this is my job to make sure that we have enough affordable housing. We're trying at least that reduce the people on the wait list, and as well as build enough affordable housing for Albertans who most in need.
This model will see residents paying rent at a rate that made sense for their individual situations, allowing them to be financially stable over the coming years. The new development is in collaboration with the private sector, nonprofit sector, and different orders of government, including the Lethbridge Housing Authority.
Lethbridge Housing Authority is thankful for the support from the federal and provincial government with their investment of $3.4 million in mixed market seniors housing here in Lethbridge.
The new space located along Southgate Boulevard will be pet-friendly, have multiple walking paths, located close to shopping centers, and will have access to the Cooley Creek Park across the street. Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Neudorf says the housing is long overdue for the city.
One of our biggest challenges as one of the central communities in southern Alberta, With all of the other amenities that we have, we find a lot of seniors relocating to Lethbridge and cities like this for their retirement. Just ease of shopping, ease of transport, and now affordable housing as well.
The project will create about 91 jobs and is anticipated to be completed in early 2022. For Bridge City News, I'm Carson Marsouk.
Muscular Dystrophy Canada is providing $366,000 to Alberta Precision Laboratories to begin screening newborns for spinal muscular atrophy. SMA is a rare genetic condition that causes muscle weakness. The test, which is part of a one-year pilot initiative, will be added to Alberta's newborn metabolic screening program, which currently screens newborns for 21 conditions. Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro says early detection will help babies with SMA have more of a fighting chance.
Over the next 6 months, Alberta Precision Labs, now under Dr. Bullman's leadership, will be completing its work to develop a trusted, quality screening test, making Alberta only the second province in Canada to screen newborns for spinal muscular atrophy. And we know that one of the greatest burdens for families of a child who is living with this condition begins with the long and often arduous process of obtaining a diagnosis for their child. Newborn screening is another important step toward shortening this difficult journey.
Prior to newborn screening and treatments, infants born with SMA often didn't make it to their second birthday. The evidence is clear. The earlier the diagnosis, the greater the opportunities and choice in treatment and supportive care. Newborn screening gives families the opportunity to make important healthcare decisions earlier and gives every child a chance to realize their developmental potential.
Alberta Parks says close to 100,000 Kananaskis Country Conservation Passes have now been sold since the program began in June. The initiative has brought in around $6.2 million in revenue. Officials say more than 37,000 were single and multi-day passes and close to 60,000 were annual passes. All vehicles stopping in K-Country, a popular recreation area west of Calgary, are now required to have a pass. They sell for $15 a day or $90 for the season. Charities in Lethbridge are set to receive $500,000 in grants from the Community Foundation of Lethbridge and Southwestern Alberta. The Community's Priorities Fund will provide the money to charities throughout the province, and the Henry S. Varley Fund supports projects that provide innovation, community education, and training. The Executive Director for the Community Foundation of Lethbridge, Charlene Davidson, says it's an honor to provide this money to deserving organizations in the community.
I think these grants this year are particularly important for our charitable sector because a lot of our charities lost their fundraisers for 2020. Some lost them again for 2021. We had tremendous support across the charitable sector last year from our community. I'm not sure exactly how strong that support is this year, but charities are definitely struggling, so I think these grants will be even more important for them.
The foundation is also celebrating their 55th year in serving the community, and this is the last round of funding, which will take the organization to over $1 million distributed in 2021. So are you looking for a way to beat the heat and rehydrate? Tim Hortons is running its annual Camp Day, raising money in an effort to send youth in our community to summer camps. Over 30 kids between the ages of 12 to 16 from Southern Alberta are able to develop new skills, build on their leadership, and gain self-confidence while away at camp in Kananaskis Country. The owner of Tim Hortons Fairway South, Brandon Banga, says almost all locations across the city are hosting fun activities in support of the fundraiser.
So all of our hot coffee sales, all of our iced coffee sales, all of those sales we donate towards Tim Hortons camps. And then we're also collecting donations. We got a couple of fun games going on here today. We've got a guess the coffee bean in the container count. We've got some fun games that our general manager and her daughter are doing. Basically pick a cone, knock a cone over, you're winning a prize. It's a free coffee, it's a free donut, something that everyone can partake in.
This is the 30th year Tim Hortons has offered Camp Day, raising approximately $200 million to help send kids to camp. The Lethbridge Scouts will be hosting a fundraising event of their own. The Globetrotter Scout Challenge is an initiative to help bring Scouts to the World Scout Jamboree in South Korea for 2023. As Micah Quinn explains, the team has a goal of completing close to 9,000 kilometers while running, walking, or biking in this fundraiser.
Starting August 1st, you can complete distances of 50 kilometers, 80 kilometers, or 100 kilometers on your feet or on a bike until the end of the month. The goal this year is to raise $2,000 for the fundraiser.
We've already raised $700. The eventual goal to send the youth is $35,000 to send 7 youth to the Jamboree. It is expensive, but remember that there is a pre-camp, there is food and lodging for 2 weeks, and all of the programming is included in that pricing per youth. It's approximately $5,000 to $7,000 to send each youth to the Jamboree.
Burmack says the World Scout Jamboree is one of the most fulfilling events she's ever attended.
I personally went to the West Virginia World Jamboree in 2019, and it was the culmination of my whole scouting life of 30 years. I'd never even seen anything like that, with 65,000 people in one area. It was absolutely awesome.
You can visit racepro.ca/globetrotter for more information on the fundraiser. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The Parliamentary Budget Officer predicts the federal government will not balance the budget until the year 2070. Now, that's almost 50 years from now. The COVID-19 pandemic played a huge role in keeping our country in the red. Ottawa is projected to rack up another $2.7 trillion in debt before we're back in black by the year 2070. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation says interest charges alone could cost taxpayers close to $4 trillion by the year 2070. Joining me now to talk about this is the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Franco Terrazzano. Now, Franco, what will happen if the federal government does not change its spending habits?
When Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, when he was first running to be the Prime Minister, he told Canadians that he would eventually balance the budget in 2019. But now we're learning that if things don't change, if the government doesn't rein in its deficit spending, the Canadians might have to wait about 5 decades before we see the federal government return to a balanced budget. Now, this is going to add trillions of dollars to the debt tab, trillions of dollars to interest costs, if that is true, if we don't see that balanced budget until 2070. And when we talk about interest costs, that's a ton of money that Canadian taxpayers lose out on, because that's not going to healthcare, that's not going to lower taxes, that would go to the bond fund managers on Bay Street.
So what do you say to people who say you really need to cut the Liberals some slack? After all, we're just coming out of a pandemic and those CERB payments were desperately needed.
We have to see our federal politicians start to rein in spending, and there's definitely areas where they can cut some fat off the government budget, right? We're talking about MP pay raises. They've received not 1, but 2 pay raises while millions of Canadians struggled during COVID-19. We need to start to see our federal bureaucrats start to willing to be sharing in the tough times, right? We saw so many private sector families take it on the chin. And finally, we need our federal politicians to take a taxpayer-friendly approach to recovery. We shouldn't be seeing them handing out corporate welfare.
Thanks so much, Franco. That was Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joining us from Ottawa. You know, many believe that even though Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has not called a federal election just yet, politicians are already in campaign mode. Political reporter Brian Lilly says when it comes to the polls right now, the Conservatives are not far behind the Liberals.
If the polls that show it's a 2 to 3 point difference between Erin O'Toole and Justin Trudeau, could he actually win? Absolutely. We're going to have to wait and see. Look, I've been around this game long enough to tell you that campaigns matter, and anyone that tells you on the start of, day one of an election campaign, anyone that tells you who's going to win at the end, well, they're not very smart, they haven't been around long, and they're not paying attention to what's happened in the past.
Brian will also talk about the latest Trudeau ethics violation, which may be investigated by the Federal Ethics Commissioner. That interview is coming up after Business News. Many Canadians are reuniting with their loved ones after a prolonged pandemic separation. A couple in Winnipeg, Richard and Linda Davis, say they were overjoyed to hug their grandkids for the first time in 15 months. Cameras were there to capture that very special moment.
I see you coming! When I hugged my grandchildren, I realized, holy cow, are they ever bigger than they were?
Yeah. And they're just more, and I sort of didn't realize how much I had missed, by not seeing them for weeks and weeks and weeks. And
well, we saw them. It's not that we didn't see them. We're very fortunate we live in the same city. This would be much harder for people that are opposite ends of the country, or God forbid, in different countries. I want them to feel my love. I don't want this distance to grow. I'm grateful for the technology that has kept us at least in touch. But there's nothing like
Physical touch.
The physical touch of
And
the people you love.
every time I hug my grandchildren, I always whisper something special to them. You know, like, I love you, you're one of my favorites, or how come you're so beautiful? You know what I mean? Just something that I can,
Between you and them.
just one-on-one. I took hugging for granted because it was so easy to do. Every time we saw them, we would hug each other. And then when they're not there, seeing them 45 feet away in a car is not the same as, being close.
You can definitely feel the love there. We had a few light showers in parts of southwestern Alberta again today, and the air quality has been a lot better with a lot of the smoke finally leaving us. Blue sky and more sunshine are on the way. Complete weather details are on deck. Some regions of southwestern Alberta saw light rain again today, which has been great for our farmers. Jeanette Roche is here now with a full look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, the moisture, although welcomed, will be short-lived.
Yeah, well, that's true, Hal. We're still looking at a 30% chance of showers this evening, looking at possibility a risk of thunderstorms overnight as well. But into tomorrow, we're going to have the clear skies and clear sailing for the rest of the week. Lots of sunshine on Thursday, high of 24, 28 the high for Friday, 27 for Saturday, up to 30 degrees on Sunday, 28 on Monday, and 29 on Tuesday. So it's going to be a beautiful, warm week. Hopefully that smoke will stay away from us. Average high for this time of year, 26. So we're coming out well above that coming up later this week. Average low, 11 degrees. 36 was our high temperature on this day back in 1945. And back in 1953, we had our chilliest day on record, which was only 6 degrees. Sun rose this morning at 5:48 a.m. and sunset this evening right at 9:28 p.m., giving us around 15 hours and 40 minutes of daylight. Not too bad. Looking to the west coast tomorrow, mix of sun and cloud in both Victoria and Vancouver. 23, going to feel a lot cooler by the water for sure. 22 in Vancouver, 20 in Edmonton tomorrow, 22 in Calgary with lots of sunshine. Both of those cities a little bit windy, 50 kilometer per hour winds tomorrow in Calgary and about up to 40 winds in Edmonton. Now, both Regina and Saskatoon looking at some showers, a risk of thunderstorm, and also some local smoke in those cities as well. 25 in Saskatoon, 27 Regina, 27 over in Winnipeg with a mix of sun and cloud. Now, in Toronto and Ottawa, both we're looking at sunshine in the morning, increasing cloud by noon. Ottawa could see some showers tomorrow, 25 in Ottawa tomorrow. 26 in Toronto, 24 in Montreal under mainly sunny skies over there. Now, over on the East Coast, we are seeing more rains, though, about 2 to 4 millimeters of rain expected in Fredericton tomorrow with the risk of a thunderstorm. 20 degrees there, 22 tomorrow, the high in Halifax. Halifax looking at about 5 millimeters of rain. 10 to 20 millimeters of rain in Charlottetown tomorrow. So should get a lot more rainy. 18 degrees, the high 15 in St. John's with 60% chance of showers there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather is brought to you by Jeff Reimer of Royal LePage South Country Real Estates, 403-380-1779.
WestJet said it has ended talks with the federal government about an aid package to help the airline during the pandemic. The statement came shortly after Canada announced plans to reopen the border to fully vaccinated U.S. citizens next month and to vaccinated travelers from around the world in September. This follows the Trudeau Liberals handing out a $5.9 billion to Air Canada, mostly through low-interest loans. Ottawa also loaned Air Transat $700 million and a loan of up to $270 million to the parent company of Porter Airlines. Many people here on the prairies are worrying about their finances this summer. A new report from MNP's Consumer Debt Index found 40% of residents in Saskatchewan and Manitoba doubt they can cover all of their living expenses this year without going into debt. That is the most since December of 2019. Earlier this year, the index found that many residents reported being within $200 of not being able to pay all of their bills and debt obligations every month. Canfor says it is reducing production capacity at its Canadian sawmills because wildfires are impacting its ability to transport products to market. The lumber producer based in Vancouver says around 115 million board feet of capacity will be reduced during the third quarter beginning on Monday. Company officials say Canfor is developing plans to minimize impacts to employees and contractors. Canfor says it is working closely with the provinces and wildfire services in BC, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba to support a safe response to extreme wildfire conditions. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 167 points on the day to finish at 20,110. The Dow was up 286 points to 34,798. The S&P 500 was up 35 points to 4359, and the Nasdaq was up 133 points to 14,632. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 310 to $70.30 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 8 cents to $3.96 US. Gold was down 9 cents to $18.0357 US an ounce, and silver was up a cent to $25.27 US an ounce. Wheat is at $410 per metric ton, barley's at $406, canola's at $8.76, and corn is at $433 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 28 cents to $120.05, feeder cattle were up $1.25 to $156.78, and lean hogs were up $1.58 to $106.58. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 79.63 US.
Recapping one of our top stories this hour, a state of emergency has been declared in BC as the province's wildfires continue to grow. Wildfire threats in many regions are forcing thousands of people to prepare for mass evacuations. More than 3,000 firefighters are now battling the blazes in the Okanagan, Kamloops, and Caribou regions. Around 300 wildfires are still burning across the province, with several being out of control. Many people believe a federal election will be called fairly soon. You can include political reporter Brian Lilly in that conversation. Brian will explain why we may be headed to the polls this fall and if the Conservatives stand a chance at winning in just a moment. After more than a year, the Canada-US border is set to reopen, but only somewhat. To talk about this in more detail is political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly. Brian, it appears as though the Americans, it'll be a little easier for them to cross the border, but not so much for us to get to the United States.
Well, not yet. And let me tell you, Hal, my parents are snowbirds. They have been back in Canada since March 2020. They were in Florida when all the COVID lockdowns started to happen. They came back earlier than they wanted to. They didn't want to be back here. They wanted to be in Florida. They wanted to be in Florida over the last winter. And now, like so many Canadians, whether you want to be in Florida or Texas or Arizona or Palm Springs, they're itching to get back. And they were so hopeful for this announcement. And what did we find out? The Americans aren't quite ready to open their border to us yet, but we're willing to open our border to them now. And so, sorry, not quite now. On August 9th, Americans who are fully vaccinated, meaning they've had 2 doses, or the Johnson & Johnson, because they've got Johnson & Johnson, the single-shot vaccine, and you've had 2 weeks since your last shot, you will be allowed into Canada. Children 12 and under traveling with their parents, grandparents, what have you, they will be allowed to enter and not have to quarantine. By the way, for Canadians coming back to Canada, the whole hotel quarantine thing, that goes away. But we're not able to go down to the United States just the same. So it's a very gradual reopening of the border. And in fact, you know, if you remember back to when all of this started, it was travelers other than Americans who were barred first from entering Canada. And then a few days later, it was, we're closing the border to Americans. Now we're opening the border to Americans first on August 9th, and it's not until September 7th that travelers from other countries who are double vaccinated, have the right vaccinations, not ones we don't accept, who will be allowed into the country. So all very much a gradual and slow-moving process as far as getting back to some sort of normal when it comes to travel.
Now, as the border is slowly reopening, Brian, a strike could potentially grind any progress to a halt. Can you explain?
Yeah, well, this is going to be strange. So the 8,500 members of the Canada Border Services Agency Union they've been in a strike position for some time. They haven't had a contract, believe it or not, Hal. They haven't had a contract since June or July 2018. So it's already been 3 years without a contract. They worked all through COVID without a contract, but now they're saying, you know what? There's a few things we want. We want to make sure that wages are looked after, but also safety is looked after. Non-uniform members that don't have to be at the border, are they able to work from home? Things like that. So apparently CBSA officers getting a lot more abuse than they used to at the border. That's something that they want to deal with. So these people could be going on strike in early August, just about the same time as the Canada-US border is somewhat, but not fully reopening. So that could change absolutely everything when it comes to being able to go across the border to, well, I was hoping to go across the border to a Bills game, say in September. Not sure that'll happen yet. But, for Americans coming here, a lot of border communities rely on tourism. They rely on the people coming across the shop. All of that could be put at risk by this strike action.
Yeah, we have the same thing here with Montana, Coots border crossing. A lot of those border businesses, you're right, rely heavily on those tourist dollars. Brian, as for a potential fall election, the Prime Minister did his sprint here in the West. We saw him here, then jetted off to Quebec for some funding announcements. Now Trudeau is pushing some money into Ontario. Brian, you think a campaign is unofficially underway, but that our Prime Minister should make it official so that taxpayers are not paying for his re-election?
Well, do you remember in 2015, I believe the date was August 2nd, 2015, Stephen Harper said, I'm calling an election right now, and voting day will be October 19th. People said, oh, this is crazy. This is a 78-day campaign. This is the longest election campaign ever. Well, guess what? We're in the middle. Stephen Harper said he was calling that because he wanted to put everyone on an equal footing, Hal. He said, there's no sense having the government being able to campaign with taxpayer dollars and the opposition being out there somewhat with taxpayer dollars campaigning. He said, let's put everyone on the same footing. Let's call the election now. We all know when voting day will be and people can make up their minds. Didn't work out too well for Stephen Harper in 2015. Right now, Justin Trudeau is going across the country. As you said, he did the sprint across the West. The transit funding in Calgary, the transit funding in Surrey, British Columbia, the daycare funding in BC, the daycare funding in Nova Scotia, funding for Pratt & Whitney Aerospace in Montreal this week, campaign announcements in Brampton, in Hamilton, and the list goes on. The guy is campaigning on our dime. He's flying across the country, making government spending announcements. He's writing checks that he doesn't have to cash while still sitting in the government chair. So the opposition parties are not on the same footing as the government, and we are in the middle of an election campaign. This is the type of thing where we should, every party should be on the same footing. We should all be looking at them in the same way. Don't tell me that we're not in the middle of an election campaign when Justin Trudeau is campaigning like this. It's going to go on for days and days. And if you backtrack it from when the election's expected, sometime around September 14th or so, you backtrack it to when he actually started campaigning, guess what? You end up with the same length of campaign as Stephen Harper in 2015. It's just that Justin Trudeau will spend half of that campaign time on your dime instead of his.
Now, Brian, if we do in fact head to the polls this fall, some political pundits say Erin O'Toole and the Conservatives could win fewer seats than they did in 2019. But you don't buy that. In fact, you believe the Tories have a shot at winning.
Well, they do. I mean, it depends on which set of polls you're looking at. There's, I don't want to say that, well, there's this one poll that I really like and it shows the Conservatives are winning. No, there's two camps. There's a couple of camps, several polls that show that the Liberals have a double-digit lead. And then there are several polls that show that it's between 2 and 3 points. So there's not a convergence of the pollsters yet, which tells me that the electorate is fluid. So Erin O'Toole started out the 2017 leadership race, to replace Stephen Harper. He finished in 3rd place behind Maxime Bernier and Andrew Scheer, who actually won the event. Erin O'Toole started out that campaign as a nobody, where no one knew who he was, where his communications teams would get calls saying, when is she available for an interview? Because they thought that Erin O'Toole was a woman. And he finished 3rd. So he was slow and steady, almost won the race. In the 2020 campaign, he was slow and steady, won the race because he wasn't expected to win, and yet he did. So, if the polls that show it's a 2 to 3 point difference between Erin O'Toole and Justin Trudeau, could he actually win? Absolutely. We're going to have to wait and see. Look, I've been around this game long enough to tell you that campaigns matter, and anyone that tells you on the start of, day one of an election campaign, anyone that tells you who's going to win at the end, well, they're not very smart, they haven't been around long, and they're not paying attention to what's happened in the past.
Well, let's talk about something that could potentially hurt our Prime Minister heading into a potential election. The Ethics Commissioner says another investigation has been launched against Trudeau. Now, this one involves another claim of conflict of interest. Can you explain, and will this really have any impact of the Liberals being re-elected?
Well, at this point, it's an investigation into whether they should launch an investigation, which, Hal, find me what the difference is. But Ethics Commissioner Mario Dion responded to a letter from Conservative MP Michael Barrett, who said, look, we're a little concerned about the contracts handed out to Tom Pitfield. I almost said Michael Pitfield, handed out to Tom Pitfield, who is a childhood friend of Justin Trudeau. Now, Tom Pitfield's father, Michael Pitfield, was both a former Liberal senator, but before that was the clerk of the Privy Council for Pierre Trudeau. So the two men grew up together. Tom Pitfield was in Justin Trudeau's wedding party. They both took part in that, vacation to the Aga Khan's private island, the one that got Trudeau in trouble with the Ethics Commissioner. He's also the guy that the Liberals turn to for digital strategy when it comes to using big data to try and target voters when it comes to elections. His company, in between elections, gets contracts to help MPs manage big data. So there are questions about whether the Prime Minister is using his influence to sign up 97% of the Liberal caucus, or 149 MPs, to pay a contract towards Tom Pitfield's firm. We don't know what it's going to be, but in about a week to 10 days, we'll find out what the Ethics Commissioner decides on whether he will launch a full investigation or not. Will this hurt him? It's tough to say. Look, the Aga Khan's Island hurt him a little bit. The WE scandal hurt him a little bit. All of these things hurt him a little bit. If you end up with a narrative that Justin Trudeau can't be trusted because he has ethics problems, that could help bring him down. Paul Martin won a minority government in 2004, even though the sponsorship scandal was going on. But eventually, things built and built and built, and eventually, Stephen Harper was able to beat him, partly due to ethics concerns. People will eventually say, you know what, I've had enough of this. They're willing to put up with a certain amount, but not enough. We'll have to wait until voting day to find out where the public actually is.
There's been quite a bit of speculation that former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney will be running for the Liberal Party if there is a fall election, but Carney says his previous commitments will not allow him to run. Tell me more.
Oh, we've been speculating about where Mark Carney is going to run. When Catherine McKenna, the former Infrastructure and Environment Minister, said she won't seek re-election, everyone said, well, Mark Carney's going to run in Ottawa Centre. And then there was speculation that David McGuinty, longtime Liberal MP, I think he was first elected in 2004, that he would be given a diplomatic appointment so that Mark Carney could run. And so there's all this speculation, and eventually it became, where won't Mark Carney run? Mark Carney's going to run because he's the future of the Liberal Party. He had to come out with a statement and say, if there's an election before the end of October, early November, I'm not running. He has said that he's fully in support of the Liberal government. Now, remember, this is a guy who worked closely with Jim Flaherty, who was finance minister at the time, and Stephen Harper, who was prime minister at the time, all through the 2008-2009 financial crisis. He helped lead global initiatives in steadying the banking system worldwide. So he's not a guy without some credentials. But while he was working with Conservatives back then, he has pledged his allegiance to the Liberals now, and yet says, if they call an election too soon, I won't be running. So a lot of people looked at Mark Carney as the next leader of the Liberal Party. He has now counted himself out, and most of the betting money is on an election call between August 8th and August 16th, Hal, in terms of when an election will be called. Nova Scotians go to the polls on August 17th, so Justin Trudeau just has that 1 week window where he has to have some overlap, and other than that, he's free and clear to call an election with voting day sometime in September.
Now, Brian, let's talk about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's statements on residential schools. You say he tries to blame other people, and this week he said he would welcome a criminal investigation into what happened at those schools. Now, from what I recall, his father, Pierre Trudeau, was Prime Minister at the time the residential school crisis was at its peak.
His father oversaw the opening of 7 schools while he was Prime Minister. There were some schools opened while he was in government, but not Prime Minister. But 7 schools were opened while he was Prime Minister. None of them, by the way, affiliated with religious organizations, but because by that time, they had abandoned working with the Anglican Church or the Presbyterian/United Church or the Catholic Church. They had decided that no, the government will run these schools. So 7 schools opened between 1968, when Pierre Trudeau became Prime Minister, and 1976, just before Justin Trudeau and I started kindergarten. That always, hits me, Hal, because were I born to another family, I could have been going to one of these schools. Justin Trudeau, born to another family, could have been going to one of these schools. This is something that he should be considering. Instead, he keeps using these announcements, these statements, to try and shift blame to others when the ultimate blame lays with the federal government of Canada, which for most of the time, my colleague Laurie Goldstein at the Toronto Sun calculated the numbers, and at 68% of the time that residential schools were open, Liberals were in charge. But he keeps trying to, put it off on Conservatives with Sir John A. Macdonald or with the Catholic Church, which is his latest thing. The federal government was the one that mandated these and then contracted the churches, be it Catholic, Anglican, Presbyterian, United, whatever. They contracted them to run them with underfunding, which is something that we knew about back in 1907, and the Liberal government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier refused to fix it.
Brian, we only have about a moment left here, but quickly, the Trudeau Liberals announced that Inuit leader Mary Simon would be our next Governor General. She's scheduled to be installed next Monday, but there have been more than 400 complaints against her because she doesn't speak French against her appointment.
Yeah, so the official languages commissioner, Raymond Théberge, has said that he's going to look into this. All he can do is investigate the Privy Council office. He can't investigate the Governor General. He can't investigate the Queen because he has no authority over the Queen or over the Governor General. So it's kind of a fishing expedition. It's kind of a looking to see, can we blame somebody for something? But look, the official languages commissioner, like the official languages committee in the House of Commons, is really the French languages commissioner and the French languages committee. This is not about making sure that there's bilingualism. And all these attempts to say that you must speak English and French really are about excluding people who are not in the Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa triangle. And if you're not in that, you don't deserve to get any appointment, be it Governor General, Supreme Court, or anything else. That's what these appointments and that's what these rules are all about. So this won't go anywhere, but it will appease some people in Quebec.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Hal.
Alberta politics has been quite heated over the last year, with calls for Premier Jason Kenney to resign and for Alberta to even separate. Today we're joined by veteran politician Paul Hinman. He was the first leader of the original Wildrose Party and also served as the MLA for Cardston Tabor Warner from 2004 to 2008. Paul is currently the interim leader of the Wildrose Independence Party of Alberta. Paul, welcome to Bridge City News.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Hal.
First of all, tell us a bit about your party and why you feel that Alberta really needs a change in government.
Well, the NDP were a disaster and toxic for Alberta. The UCP have just been well, they've been traitors to us, that they haven't stood up and put Alberta's interests first. They've just basically been laid down to Ottawa, and we need a premier and a provincial government that actually understands the needs of the province of Alberta, our people, our industry, and it's just been a complete failure. We've gone from bad to worse. We have governments that are just spending is out of control, and people realize that we need a government that's actually going to protect their personal interests, their lives, their property, their freedoms. And this just isn't happening for Albertans, and we're really getting hurt bad by our government.
Now, a recent Angus Reid poll, Paul, says that among decided voters, 41% support the NDP, 30% for the UCP, and a surprising 20% for your party, for the Wildrose. Did the poll results maybe surprise you a little bit?
You know, the reception and the growth of our party has been phenomenal. And yes, I guess it bumped a little bit higher than we expected. But the bottom line, Albertans are tired of picking the lesser of two evils, and they're quite excited and jumping towards the Wildrose Independence Party, and for good reason. You know, we're there to put Albertans first, to protect their freedoms, their livelihood, their freedom of religion. And these other governments, just the personal and industrial attacks on Albertans is just unacceptable. And people are looking for a solution. And that's what the Wildrose Independence Party is that they're here to actually to serve the people and not have the people servants of the government.
Now, let's break down the numbers actually for just a moment when you do the math here. According to that poll, many conservative-minded voters are likely thinking, you know, this is going to just be a repeat of the election in 2015, splitting the vote on the right and the NDP going right up the middle and winning. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I would say it's not about splitting the vote. It's about not wasting your vote. And why would any Albertan want to waste their vote again on the UCP and their I just want to say their betrayal of Albertans. And we absolutely know that the NDP was disastrous, the debt that they unloaded to us. They never fixed anything except for they put forward their personal agendas to the detriment of Alberta. I mean, look what they did to our oil and gas industry, and it's continued to be decimated. This idea of a social license. We have two governments that are bent on following Ottawa's divisive rules. They're rigged against Albertans, and they're not there for us. And so rather than, like I say, wasting a vote on the NDP or the UCP, people can actually vote for a party that they believe in, that know that's going to be there for Albertans and for freedom and for families and just the future for Alberta. These other parties have no interest in Alberta's future.
It appears as though your party, the Wildrose Independence Party, is gaining momentum here in Alberta. How many members do you have in your party right now?
Well, we're approaching 8,000 paid members. We're quite excited with the activity. And again, each week, the governments continue to hurt us. And like with Bill C-10 being passed on censorship, every time the governments do things, we see a boost. The lockdowns have been detrimental when they arrest pastors, when they shut down businesses. People are realizing that we've got to go somewhere else. And we just keep seeing the donations and the memberships ticking up week after week.
How many local constituency associations do you have so far?
Well, there's 87 in Alberta, and we have 50 of them, give or take a few, that are up and running, and we'll continue to bring them online as quick as we can, but it takes a little bit of work with COVID and not being able to meet with people. But we're like I say, we're approaching 50 if we haven't hit 50 this week. And we have a pipeline of CA people that are wanting to get up and running, and it's just been enjoyable to work with the different groups that are excited to be part of this movement.
Now, Paul, realistically, will you have a shot at having a candidate in each Alberta riding in 2023?
I'm very confident we will. You know, back in 2008, we were able to fill the slate. 2004, we filled the slate. And we think there's nothing more important than for every Albertan to be able to vote for something they believe in. And it's just that there's people stepping forward, there's great interest, and I'm very confident that we will have a full slate across all 87 constituencies here in Alberta.
Now, you believe that a sovereign Alberta is the only solution. How would you go about deciding this if you won the election?
Well, it's an excellent question. And, you know, when anybody ever wants to be independent and out on their own, there's steps that they need to take to do that. And to be an independent country, it's no different. The top two things that we would need to do is be first to create our own police force and judiciary system, that we'd have to, have a patch over and to take control from the RCMP here for a provincial police force, one that has elected civilian oversight. Number two, we need to start collecting all of the taxes here in Alberta by Albertans for Albertans, and not sending our hard-earned dollars down to Ottawa and then putting our hand out asking even for lunch money to come back. It's been a complete black hole. We send $50 billion down to Ottawa and then we beg for money to come back, and that's just not acceptable anymore. We'd create our own Alberta pension plan so people can have confidence in the future. We'd have our own employment insurance policy here, so that Albertans are supporting Albertans and not the rest of the country with their lax employment rules compared to ours. We'd actually govern ourselves with our own environmental legislation, and we'd actually continue to be able to promote Alberta industry, especially our oil and gas, which is just world renowned. I mean, we've set so many precedents when it comes to the good environmental regulations. Just all of those things have been cared for very carefully, and we're an example to the world, and the world needs more Alberta oil, not less, and we want to preserve that industry here. We'll protect it. We'll also look after our immigration policy, all of those things that will take those steps to exercise our full autonomy, so Albertans can have great confidence and say, oh wow, this really is working, this is wonderful, and have confidence to be able to then themselves voting in a referendum on sovereignty and not having politicians decide for them.
Now, Paul, you mentioned the energy sector for just a moment there, oil and gas sector. How would you actually get our products to Tidewater? That's a big concern, even with Premier Kenney discussing that.
Well, that's an excellent question. And as a member of Canada, we've seen very much that they're able to shut us down. That's one of the benefits of being a sovereign nation. International law does not allow countries to block other countries from exporting and getting their produce or bringing resources in from Tidewater. We'd actually be in a much better position, but not only that, the Eagle Spirit Energy Corridor, those Indigenous people are very anxious and wanting to deal and to get a corridor going through northern BC. And I just think that the opportunity would be exciting as a Wildrose independent government to be able to move forward on these issues and not be blocked anymore by our current federal government, who says we're not allowed to have that right, even though the Constitution says we have it. They have not allowed us to exercise that right here in Alberta. So it would be an actual plus, not a negative.
Have you had a chance to chat with Jay Hill, the interim leader of the Maverick Party, who wants to see the Western provinces join forces and separate?
Yes, and Jay, I haven't spoken to him recently, but he's always said, we need to try once more and to send MPs to vote no. I mean, the great benefit of the Maverick Party is bringing Western Canada together, and that's what we need to do. There's nothing more powerful than if Northern BC and Alberta and Saskatchewan were to come together and want to form a Western Canada that would be strong and free. That would be exciting, but we have to do it on the provincial levels, and so we just want to lead here with Alberta and then allow BC and Saskatchewan, maybe Manitoba wants to join us, certainly the territories. I just think it's an exciting opportunity to have a strong and free country, as opposed to one that's got the ball and shackles of Ottawa telling us what we can and can't do.
So, Paul, what are your thoughts on equalization payments? Has Alberta been giving too much, as Premier Kenney suggested?
Well, people always talk about equalization payments. The problem is that we pay too many taxes. Equalization is just a small part of it. And I mean, the amount of money that we send in taxes versus what we're represented and allowed to participate in, it's laughable. And so it's a lot more than just equalization. It's the taxation of Albertans. It's the regulations of Alberta industries. It's the shutting down of our pipelines and our opportunities to export our products. I mean, it's the attack on our beef industry and agriculture. All of those things are attacks from Ottawa. And equalization you know, that's what you want to say, the flavor that people like to talk about, but it's a lot bigger problem than just equalization.
Now, one of the complaints against the UCP is how it handled the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the issues you're concerned about is the extent of the restrictions, killing a lot of the small businesses and limiting religious freedom. Can you explain some of your concerns about the restrictions?
Absolutely. This is decimated so many lives. This government, who's supposed to be looking after the interest of the individuals and families and businesses, has only been interested in looking after their faulty healthcare system. Number one, they never ever compared and showed that, you know, gosh, every year in the flu season our ICUs are maxed out. They created all this fear mongering like it was something new and unusual. And, you know, they didn't even allow for treatment. You know, they canceled their own tests, I guess, if you want to say, like on ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine last July. They didn't pursue any answers. They just fell lock and step with the World Health Organization, which we know has not been in the best interest of people outside of China. And again, the way this government is picking and choose, you know, what industries can be open. It's okay for hundreds and thousands of people to go to Costco and to Walmart, but we can't have 200 people attend a church. I mean, there was never anything scientific about this. This was just attack on people's individuals' business, their lives, their families, scaring children and saying they can't go to school, when there's overwhelming evidence that COVID was not a problem for children. It was a problem for seniors. It was a problem for seniors with preconditions. And yet they've blown this totally out of proportion. They always say follow the science when they themselves just go back and forth on it. And again, what's my biggest concern, historically, the flu shot has been for seniors, and we'd allow them to pick and choose. And for Premier Kenney to say that we want 70% vaccination from those 12 years of age and up, this vaccine has not gone through the proper, what would I say, the proper steps for safety that we do. This is being put out under the Emergency Act, and the efficacy and the safety of this shot has not been determined. But it is interesting that the information is finally coming out. And the WHO, you know, just came out this week on Monday and says, you know what, we really shouldn't be giving this shot to children. This mRNA is scary stuff. It's unknown, it's experimental, and it's just unbelievable that we've set up a lottery here in the province encouraging people to be participating in this, and there's been no informed consent.
Paul, we only have a few moments left here. How would a Wildrose government have handled the COVID-19 pandemic differently?
Well, excellent question. And first of all, we should be creating a more robust healthcare system. I mean, we had the Butter Dome that was never used. There's no reason why we didn't increase, you know, respiratory therapists and other things to prepare for it, especially for the second wave. But the most important thing is the government should be collecting all of the information out there and the best practices, and allowing doctors to pursue what they think is the right thing. This one thought central government censored decisions. I mean, I'm not sure if you heard about Dr. Francis Christian, who just got fired at the University of Saskatchewan because he was speaking out about vaccinating children. I mean, this is totalitarian, authoritarian thuggery, where academia and individuals' lives are being threatened if you don't go along with the government's dictates. And it's just unbelievable to me, the situation that we're in. And what government's job is to collect that information, disseminate it, and to allow professionals, whether it's doctors or nurses or whatever, to use their best judgment and their years of practice to actually be treating individuals. And this idea of the dog chasing its tail with those PCR tests, which we know had an inflated number of false positives to scare people. Everything the government did was about fear mongering and taking away people's hopes, scaring our children, saying, don't go visit your grandparents, you know, you might be the one who kills them. Everything was backwards. When you listen to someone like Lieutenant Colonel David Redmond, who, you know, specializes and was an actual Emergency Act specialist, we've done everything wrong. You don't turn over the province and the economy to a doctor to shut everything down. And again, they didn't treat people as individuals. They just were treating numbers. All we ever heard time and time again was we need to protect our healthcare system, but they never increased the capacity, the robustness. We've been, you know, Our healthcare system has been overrun for 20 years. And yet, do we have more hospitals, more nurses? Do we have more facility and treatments? No, we don't. And we spent billions of dollars and still have nothing to show for it. And it's the same with our senior care facilities. We should have been increasing those senior care facilities and creating isolation places. So many things that should have been done that weren't. And this government has no interest in Albertans or in their businesses. They only have interest in their healthcare system. And I want to say just a facade of virtue signaling, which has not been in the interest of Albertans.
Paul Hinman is the interim leader of the Wildrose Independence Party of Alberta. Paul, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to it again.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.